Former Lieutenant Commander Ethan Price sat in his usual corner position at the downtown San Diego Starbucks, strategically positioned where he could maintain visual surveillance on both exits and monitor the entire customer floor without obvious scanning behavior. At 39, with 15 years as a Navy SEAL embedded in his muscle memory and neural pathways, old habits didn't fade simply because he'd signed retirement paperwork 2 years ago. The tactical positioning was unconscious. His body automatically selected the corner table that provided maximum situational awareness with minimal exposure. He could track entry points, identify potential threats, plan egress routes, and maintain 270-degree visual coverage without appearing overtly vigilant. Civilians saw a businessman working on his laptop. Ethan experienced every moment through the threat assessment protocols that had kept him alive through dozens of high-risk operations. Ethan had retired after a mission in Syria that succeeded by every official metric except the one that mattered to him personally. His SEAL team had extracted an American journalist from an ISIS cell. Perfect planning, flawless execution, 0 friendly casualties, except one. Petty Officer James Rivera, his point man and friend for 7 years, had died covering their exfiltration when enemy combatants attempted to pursue the escaping team. Rivera had held a choke point alone for 90 seconds that allowed the helicopter extraction to complete successfully. The Navy gave Ethan a Silver Star for leadership under fire. He gave them his resignation letter 6 months later, unable to continue serving in spaces where Rivera's absence created constant reminder of the cost of success. Now, Ethan worked as a security consultant, analyzing corporate vulnerability assessments, designing executive protection protocols, conducting threat analysis for companies operating in hostile international environments. Work that engaged fragments of his expertise but left him feeling like he was performing theater rather than executing missions that mattered. Beside his corner table, lying on a tactical mat that Ethan had purchased specifically for these daily Starbucks work sessions, was Shadow, a 9-year-old Belgian Malinois who'd served as Ethan's K9 partner for 4 deployments spanning Iraq and Syria. Shadow had lost most of his hearing in his right ear from the same blast that ended Rivera's life, and carried permanent shrapnel scars across his left shoulder where metal fragments remained embedded too deep for surgical removal. Belgian Malinois were elite among military working dogs, smaller and more agile than German shepherds, possessing exceptional intelligence, incredible work drive, and athletic capabilities that made them ideal for special operations. Shadow had been trained through the intensive 120-day program at Lackland Air Force Base, qualifying as a dual-purpose military working dog, specializing in explosive detection and patrol work. They had retired together under the Military Working Dog Adoption Program, a Department of Defense initiative that prioritized placement of retired MWDs with their handlers when operationally feasible. 2 damaged operators trying to find purpose in a world that moved too slow, asked too little of them, and provided no mission focus to replace what they'd lost. At precisely 14:20 hours on this Tuesday afternoon, the Starbucks maintained moderate customer density, business professionals working remotely on laptops, college students studying for exams, the ambient soundscape of espresso machines, and overlapping conversations creating white noise that most people found comforting. Ethan was finishing a threat assessment report for a technology executive planning travel to Southeast Asia when his tactical awareness registered something wrong. A woman in her late 20s, later identified as Jessica Morgan, 28 years old, marketing coordinator for a downtown advertising firm, sat 2 tables away with her laptop open but her attention fractured. She kept glancing nervously at her phone, then toward the entrance, her body language communicating distress with unmistakable clarity to anyone trained in behavioral analysis. Hunched shoulders suggesting defensive posture, rapid, shallow breathing visible in the rise and fall of her chest, hands trembling slightly when she reached for her coffee cup, eyes scanning the entrance with the hyper-vigilance characteristic of someone expecting threat arrival. Classic fear response patterns that Ethan's training had taught him to recognize in hostile populations during deployment. The source of her fear walked through the entrance 90 seconds later with the kind of aggressive purpose that immediately elevated Ethan's threat assessment to active monitoring status. Derek Vaughan, 34 years old, stood approximately 6'3" with athletic build, suggesting regular gym training, approximately 215 pounds of functional muscle. He moved directly toward Jessica's table with focused intent that cut off her natural exit route to the door. His body language telegraphed aggression, clenched fists indicating pre-violence physiological preparation, forward-leaning posture suggesting intent to intimidate, facial expression showing anger rather than neutral approach. What neither Jessica nor Vaughan knew was that they were being observed by a former SEAL conducting unconscious threat assessment with 15 years of operational experience, and a combat-deployed Belgian Malinois whose remaining functional senses had just locked onto an aggressor exhibiting hostile behavior patterns. Vaughan reached Jessica's table and leaned over her aggressively, invading personal space in calculated intimidation. His voice carried just enough to nearby tables for Ethan to capture fragments. "You think a restraining order stops me? You think hiding here during work hours protects you? We're leaving. Now." The words confirmed what body language had already communicated. This was domestic violence escalation, stalking behavior, and imminent threat to Jessica's safety. Jessica shook her head with visible terror, but attempted to stand and move away from Vaughan's aggressive proximity. That's when Vaughan grabbed her wrist with sufficient force that Jessica cried out, not loudly, but the sound of someone experiencing pain and fear. At that precise moment, Officer Lisa Chen from the San Diego Police Department entered the coffee shop through the main entrance. Off-duty, wearing civilian clothes, jeans, casual jacket, athletic shoes, just stopping for afternoon coffee during her break between shifts. She'd been a patrol officer for 6 years, trained comprehensively in de-escalation techniques and intervention protocols. What Officer Chen saw when she entered stopped her professional assessment cold. A large, aggressive male physically restraining a woman who was clearly afraid and attempting to escape. Chen's training engaged immediately. She identified herself with calm authority, displayed her badge that she carried even off-duty, and commanded Vaughan to release Jessica immediately. Vaughan's response was calculated aggression, designed to test whether the officer would escalate to physical force in a public civilian space filled with witnesses. He released Jessica's wrist but turned to face Officer Chen with hostile posturing, shoulders squared, chest out, using his 6-inch height advantage and 70-pound weight advantage as psychological weapons. "You're off duty," Vaughan said, with dismissive contempt. "This is between me and my girlfriend. Walk away before you get involved in something you'll regret." The threat was unambiguous. comply, or face violence. Chen stood her ground with professional discipline, reiterating her command for Vaughn to step away from Jessica and leave the premises. But Vaughn was 6 inches taller and outweighed her substantially. He took a deliberate step toward Chen, not striking yet, but using his physical size as a weapon to intimidate, testing whether she would back down. What neither Vaughn nor Officer Chen realized was that Ethan had already moved into tactical positioning. He'd shifted his angle of observation, changed his body orientation subtly, and given Shadow a barely visible hand signal that only someone intimately familiar with K9 operational protocols would recognize. 2 fingers tapped against his thigh, indicating alert status, target acquired, await authorization for engagement. Shadow's body had gone instantly rigid, ears forward, the functioning left ear since his right ear had lost most hearing capability. Muscles coiled for explosive action, eyes locked on Vaughn with the predatory focus that came from detecting threats across 3 combat deployments in hostile territories. The Starbucks patrons were frozen in that peculiar paralysis that grips civilians confronted with violence in supposedly safe spaces, some recording on phones with the instinct to document rather than intervene, others backing away toward exits, none moving to physically help. Jessica remained trapped at her table, crying silently with terror. Officer Chen was isolated, technically off-duty without backup, facing a suspect who was testing whether she would escalate to physical force that could be questioned later. Vaughn's confidence was building. He was calculating that neither the cop nor anyone else in this civilian coffee shop would actually stop him from taking Jessica. They were all completely unaware that 2 retired operators were on tactical standby, assessing the situation with professional detachment honed through years of operational experience, waiting with infinite patience for the precise moment when verbal de-escalation failed and physical intervention became tactically necessary. Derek Vaughn made his critical tactical error, born from ego and fundamental misunderstanding of the situation he'd created. He reached past Officer Chen to grab Jessica again, dismissing the officer as an obstacle rather than recognizing her as legitimate threat with arrest authority. Chen moved to physically block him, positioning her body between Vaughn and Jessica while maintaining verbal commands for compliance. Vaughn responded by shoving her, hard enough to send the smaller officer stumbling backward into a chair that crashed over with her. That was assault on a peace officer, a felony under California law. That was also the tactical trigger Ethan had been waiting for. Clear demonstration that verbal de-escalation had failed and physical intervention was necessary to prevent further violence. Ethan stood from his corner table and moved with the economical grace that came from thousands of hours of close-quarters combat training across 15 years of SEAL operations. His movement was fluid, balanced, purposeful, covering the distance between his table and the confrontation with professional speed that closed tactical gaps before opponents recognized threat escalation. His voice cut through the chaos with calm, absolute authority that commanded immediate attention. Step back, hands where I can see them. Do it now. The tone wasn't aggressive or emotional. It carried the command presence that SEALs developed for high-risk situations where compliance meant survival and resistance meant consequences. Vaughn spun to face this new potential threat and conducted rapid visual assessment. What he saw appeared to validate his escalating confidence. Just another customer, middle-aged guy with graying temples, no uniform, no badge, No visible weapons, no apparent authority beyond civilian status. Vaughn's ego interpreted this as manageable obstacle. Another hero? Vaughn sneered with contempt born from years of successfully intimidating people through physical dominance. Sit down before you get hurt, old man. This doesn't concern you. He turned back toward Jessica with clear intent to grab her and force her out of the coffee shop before the situation escalated beyond his control and additional law enforcement arrived. That's when Shadow moved with the explosive athleticism that characterized Belgian Malinois capabilities and made them elite among military working dogs. The dog didn't attack immediately. He interposed. Shadow positioned himself between Vaughn and Jessica with professional precision honed through 4 deployments, body low in tactical stance, one functional ear forward in focused attention, teeth bared in controlled display of aggression that communicated unambiguous message. Proceed at your own risk and discover what a combat-trained K9 can do. The growl that emanated from Shadow's chest was the same sound that had preceded apprehensions of high-value targets in Fallujah, Mosul, and Raqqa during Syrian operations. A promise of violence if the threat didn't immediately de-escalate. Vaughn, accustomed to intimidating women and untrained civilians but completely inexperienced with military working dogs, made his second catastrophic tactical mistake. He reached toward Shadow to move the dog out of his path, treating a combat-trained Belgian Malinois like a civilian pet rather than recognizing the elite military asset he was engaging. Ethan gave the authorization command in Arabic, the operational language Shadow had learned during deployment to prevent enemy combatants from issuing counter-commands. Hafiz, protect. The command was instantaneous authorization for controlled engagement. Shadow took Vaughn's extended hand in a controlled bite. Not maximum damage, but calculated pain compliance that froze Vaughn's entire body in shock. Belgian Malinois possessed bite force averaging 195 pounds per square inch, and Shadow's military training ensured he applied precisely the pressure necessary for threat neutralization without causing unnecessary permanent damage. Ethan closed the tactical distance in 2 fluid steps and applied a textbook joint lock technique that rotated Vaughn's free arm behind his back at angle that created overwhelming pain compliance, guided his unbalanced body face down onto the floor with controlled force, and immobilized him completely, using knee positioning on spine that prevented movement without causing injury. The entire sequence from Vaughn reaching for Jessica to Vaughn, neutralized on the ground, lasted exactly 7 seconds, according to Starbucks security camera footage that would later be analyzed frame by frame by law enforcement training academies. Officer Chen, recovering from being shoved and regaining her footing, moved in immediately with her backup handcuffs, always carried even during off-duty hours as standard protocol for experienced officers. She secured Vaughn's wrists while Ethan maintained body control, working with professional coordination that required no verbal communication. Shadow released on Ethan's command the instant handcuffs secured Vaughn, demonstrating the precise control that characterized military working dog training. The Belgian Malinois immediately shifted position to Jessica's table, sitting at her feet with professional alertness, providing both protection and the calming presence of a trained service animal. Jessica, shaking and crying with relief and residual terror, reached down instinctively to touch Shadow's head. the scarred combat dog who had just executed controlled apprehension of an aggressive adult male, sat perfectly still, allowing her trembling hand to rest on his fur, switching from warrior to guardian in the span of a heartbeat, demonstrating the remarkable versatility that made Belgian Malinois ideal for special operations work. On-duty San Diego Police Department officers arrived within 3 minutes. Officer Chen had activated her concealed panic button when Vaughn first became aggressive, standard protocol that ensured backup response even during off-duty situations. They found a scene that would become legendary in local law enforcement circles. An off-duty officer standing over a handcuffed suspect still pinned to the ground. A civilian woman being comforted by a military working dog. And Ethan Price standing with the relaxed posture of someone who'd executed dozens of similar operations without breaking operational calm. The investigation that rapidly unfolded revealed the full scope of what Ethan and Shadow had prevented. Derek Vaughn was Jessica Morgan's ex-boyfriend, subject to an active restraining order issued 6 weeks earlier after he'd assaulted her during an argument that resulted in her hospitalization with facial fractures. He'd been stalking her systematically, tracking her movements through social media, monitoring, and physical surveillance, waiting for an opportunity when she was isolated and vulnerable. Vaughn's vehicle, searched incident to arrest under probable cause, contained zip ties, duct tape, chloroform-soaked rags, and a burner phone with text messages to an accomplice discussing handling the problem permanently and making sure she can't testify. Detectives analyzing the evidence concluded that Vaughn had planned to forcibly abduct Jessica, transport her to an isolated location, and, based on the materials discovered and the content of his text communications, kill her to prevent her testimony in the upcoming domestic violence trial where he faced felony charges. Officer Chen's off-duty intervention had disrupted Vaughn's plan. Ethan and Shadow's tactical response had ended it permanently before Jessica could be removed from the public space where witnesses and surveillance provided protection. Derek Vaughn faced comprehensive criminal charges assembled by the San Diego County District Attorney's Office: assault on a peace officer, felony, violation of restraining order, misdemeanor escalated to felony due to violence, stalking with credible threat of death, felony, attempted kidnapping, felony, and conspiracy to commit murder based on the evidence discovered in his vehicle and the content of his text communications, felony. The prosecutor added sentencing enhancement for planning the crime with premeditation and deliberation. Facing overwhelming evidence, including Starbucks security footage showing the entire sequence, testimony from multiple witnesses, Officer Chen's professional account, and the physical evidence from his vehicle, Vaughn accepted a plea agreement to avoid trial where a jury would see the video of him assaulting a police officer and attempting to abduct Jessica. He received a 22-year prison sentence with no possibility of parole before serving minimum 18 years. Officer Lisa Chen received a formal commendation from the San Diego Police Department for her off-duty intervention and professional response under physical assault. During the commendation ceremony attended by department leadership and media coverage, Chen credited Ethan and Shadow with preventing what could have escalated into a deadly force situation requiring her to use her firearm. I was alone, off-duty, facing a suspect who outweighed me by 70 pounds and had already demonstrated willingness to use violence against a peace officer, Chen testified during the ceremony. Mr. Price and his K9 partner, Shadow, provided professional tactical intervention that saved multiple lives. Mine, Jessica's, and ironically, Derek Vaughan's, because their controlled response prevented me from having to escalate to lethal force to protect myself and Jessica. Jessica Morgan entered a witness protection-style relocation program designed for domestic violence survivors facing credible threats. She received comprehensive therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder, developed safety protocols for her new life circumstances, and eventually testified at Vaughan's sentencing hearing about the terror she'd experienced. She brought a handwritten letter to Ethan, delivered through the prosecutor's office since direct contact wasn't appropriate given the ongoing legal proceedings. You and Shadow were there when I had absolutely no one else. You didn't know me. You didn't owe me anything. But you intervened anyway when everyone else just watched and recorded. Thank you for giving me my life back and the chance to heal from this nightmare. The San Diego Police Department, recognizing the value of Ethan's operational expertise and the unique capabilities demonstrated during the Starbucks incident, offered him a contract position training officers in threat recognition, behavioral analysis, and civilian intervention protocols. Ethan accepted, bringing Shadow to training. Demonstrations where the scarred, partially deaf combat Belgian Malinois showed active duty officers what professional controlled aggression looked like: purposeful, instantly engageable, and immediately disengageable on handler command. 6 months after the incident, the Starbucks security footage went viral after Jessica authorized its public release as part of a domestic violence awareness campaign she launched with victim advocacy organizations. The video, viewed over 18 million times across multiple social media platforms, showed the entire sequence: Vaughan's initial aggression, Officer Chen's isolated intervention, Ethan's calm approach, and Shadow's precise protective positioning. Online comments focused repeatedly on a single detail that captured everything about the incident. Neither Derek Vaughan nor Officer Chen knew they had tactical backup sitting quietly in the corner until the precise moment when intervention became operationally necessary. Ethan and Shadow had been there the entire time, unnoticed and appearing completely unremarkable, until unremarkable became life-saving. Ethan and Shadow became inadvertent advocates for veteran integration into civilian life, demonstrating through documented action that military training translated directly to community protection when applied with professional discipline. Ethan began speaking at veteran organizations about finding your mission after the mission, the renewed purpose that came from using operational skills to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. 1 year after the Starbucks incident, Ethan sat in the same corner position, same tactical table, same strategic positioning that provided maximum situational awareness. Shadow lay beside him, graying now at 10 years old, but still maintaining alert posture. Officer Chen stopped by off-duty for coffee, a weekly routine they'd established where they discussed cases, training methodologies, and the challenges of maintaining vigilance in civilian spaces. Jessica visited monthly when her schedule permitted, now working as a victim advocate helping other domestic violence survivors navigate the legal system, access resources, and develop safety plans. She always brought treats for Shadow, who accepted them with the patient dignity of a combat veteran who understood his role had evolved from warrior to guardian. A young couple at a nearby table began a heated argument, voices rising in volume, body language becoming aggressive with gestures and postured. Ethan's posture shifted subtly from relaxed to alert. Shadow's head rose from his paws, good ear tracking the sound. Officer Chen's hand dropped instinctively near her concealed badge. The argument resolved itself within 30 seconds. The couple recognized their public location and emotional escalation, chose to leave separately through different exits, no intervention necessary. But the moment illustrated everything about who Ethan and Shadow remained. They were ready, vigilant, capable of immediate response if the situation deteriorated. The Starbucks manager approached Ethan's table with his regular order, coffee he didn't need to verbally request because she'd learned his routine over 2 years of daily visits. "You know," she said quietly, glancing around at the customers working peacefully on laptops and studying. "People feel safer knowing you and Shadow are here. We all do. It's like having a guardian we don't have to worry about." Ethan nodded, uncomfortable with the attention and recognition, preferring to remain unnoticed. But Shadow's tail thumped once against the floor. The Belgian Malinois' version of acknowledging a compliment, the dog's way of accepting the gratitude. What left everyone who witnessed the incident or watched the viral security footage stunned wasn't simply that Ethan and Shadow intervened with professional precision. It was the realization that they had been there all along, unnoticed, unremarkable, appearing completely ordinary, until the precise moment when unnoticed became critical and unremarkable became life-saving. Derek Vaughan had walked into that Starbucks with confidence that no one would stop him from abducting Jessica. Officer Chen had stood alone, believing backup was minutes away and she'd have to handle the threat isolation. Jessica had believed she was trapped with no escape and no protection. All three were completely unaware that a former Navy SEAL and his combat-deployed Belgian Malinois were on tactical standby, assessing threats with professional detachment developed through 15 years of operational experience, waiting with infinite patience for the moment when words failed and decisive action became necessary to protect someone unable to protect themselves. They didn't announce their presence with tactical gear or visible weapons. They didn't seek recognition or credit. They just existed in that civilian space, officially retired and done with operational work, until operational work found them, and they responded with the muscle memory of warriors who never truly stopped being what 15 years of training and deployment had made them. The most powerful frame in the viral video wasn't the takedown, the restraint, or Shadow's protective positioning. It was the opening shot showing Ethan at his corner table with Shadow beside him, both looking utterly ordinary and completely unremarkable. The kind of scene you'd walk past 100 times without realizing you were in the presence of exactly the people you desperately need if everything went catastrophically wrong. That's the fundamental lesson the incident taught. Quiet professionals don't advertise their capabilities with outward displays or aggressive posturing. They just remain ready, on tactical standby, unaware of precisely when they'll be needed, but absolutely certain they'll be there when the moment arrives.